Good evening. Welcome back to our Introduction to Judaism class. This is one of my favorites this evening, which is birth, rituals, and naming. All right, how's everybody doing this evening? Can I get a thumbs up? Again, wonderful to see everybody. And this, like all of the classes, is available on YouTube after the class happens. Check back within usually about 24 to 48 hours. I don't guarantee a specific time. I've learned my lesson, but usually you can check back and within a day or two. Sometimes even sooner than that, you'll see it posted up on our YouTube page. So this begins our study of the Jewish life cycle. What are we talking about when we're talking about life cycle in general? We begin with birth, we go all the way around through B'nai Mitzvah, confirmation, marriage, death, and of course, everything in life leads to a new generation and a new birth. Of course, there are lots of other life cycle moments that we are not discussing in this class because there are so many that there's no way we could get into all of them. Things like conversion and mourning separately from death. We will get into some of these. Jewish education and lifelong learning. Divorce, we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about marriage and remarriage. What about moving into a new home? What about adoption, starting a new job? There are lots of life cycle moments that have special Jewish rituals associated with them beyond just what we are going to be able to talk about in this class. But today we're talking about birth. And we'll begin right at the beginning. Makes sense? We'll start with Brit, Mila. These are the earliest birth rituals after a baby is born. What does Brit Mila literally mean? Brit is covenant, Mila is circumcision. So it's the covenant of circumcision. It is an ancient ritual. We know that it goes back at least to Abraham. Scholars believe that, in fact, it was already a custom in the ancient Near East among various peoples at that time. We know that there are other groups of peoples who are outside of the Abrahamic faith, meaning apart from Jews and Muslims who still practice circumcision today. We know that there are groups beyond the Abrahamic faiths that have no special attachment to Abraham or Sarah, who still practice circumcision. And scholars believe that in the ancient world that this was a part of the life cycle of many different peoples, not just Abraham and Sarah. But for our people, for the Jews, it represents something specific. It is making something holy. In the entire universe, everything that we have arrives to us in the form of raw material. Bread begins as wheat. We know that uh, every type of food must be cooked or prepared. Uh, Bread is sort of the ideal example. When we say a blessing over bread or a blessing over wine, what do we say when we say the blessing over bread? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. We thank God for bringing forth bread from the earth. But we know bread doesn't come from the earth. I never dug a shovel in the backyard and, oh, look, there's some bread. No, wheat comes from the earth, but it takes a lot of work and it takes human intervention and divine intervention to make that possible. God and human beings have to work together in order for bread to exist. It doesn't come to us directly from God, And it also doesn't come just as a result of human effort. It takes some of both. Everything is in the form of raw materials until it is shaped by human hands. Brit Mila follows this same pattern. Even human beings, even our bodies, are a partnership between God and human beings, which is signified by Brit Mila. We are in the business of making things holy. We take ordinary things and through ritual, through blessing, through tradition, we designate them as holy. We make the ordinary into the holy. And that is the central act of Brit Milah. It's saying this child is part of a covenant through this ancient ritual that designates this child for sacred living. Now, of course, that only applies to a boy. When we talk about Milah, when we talk about circumcision, at least in a literal sense, that is something that is exclusive to the male body. We'll take questions about gender after the class, but I'd be happy to answer. Of course, we live in a world where gender and sex are separate things, and I'd be happy to talk about some interesting issues around that. It's a little beyond the scope of this class. But we also have, for children who are born without a penis, without the ability to be circumcised, that is a daughter, right? We have rituals for welcoming a daughter into the Jewish people, into the covenant of the Jewish people as well. Well, in no particular order, we begin with Brit Bat, which is literally translates the covenant of a daughter, and is parallel to Brit Milah. It's a ritual of bringing a daughter into the covenant. We have Simchat Bat, a different type of ritual. And these are, for the most part, mutually exclusive. These are not, it's not you perform a litany of different rituals. It's one of these rituals, depending on the community that you're from and the traditions of that community, and to a degree, the parent's choice. A Simchat Bat is celebration of a daughter. Zeved Habat is a ritual, the gift or the receiving of a daughter. Brit Chaim, covenant of life. All of these exist over here because there is no ancient analog for a female, welcoming a female into the covenant. So over the course of the centuries, as women became a significant part of Jewish ritual life over recent centuries, these different ceremonies developed as a way of including a daughter in the covenant. Prior to modern times, meaning the last couple hundred years, there was no ritual for welcoming a daughter into the covenant because women were not considered ritually obligated equally to men. And you still see that even in modern Orthodoxy, where you have different examples, that's little m, not the movement of modern Orthodoxy, but modern day Orthodoxy, although you still have these rituals which have been adopted in different communities in modern day Judaism across the board, the obligation of a woman in the Jewish community is different in Orthodoxy, and in fact, that's one of the defining features when we talk about the different movements of Judaism in a couple of weeks. I forget when we'll have to look at the schedule. And by the way, I think I heard someone mention that they need a new copy of the schedule. Send me an email and I'll be happy to send that back out. If anybody needs a copy of the schedule, it's available. When we talk about different movements in Judaism, one of the things that you'll note is that the primary division between different movements of Judaism that exist today is the role of women, whether women are considered equal to men or whether women and men have separate roles. But regardless, in every form of Judaism, there are now rituals for including women in some ritual way when they're born. That can include, in place of the Mila, in place of circumcision, what is the actual ritual? It can include things like candle lighting or immersion, connecting the light of Genesis or the mikvah, which is a significant, has a significant connection to Jewish women's lives historically, or other types of innovative services that find ritual ways to include young baby girls who are born. Both for a son or a daughter, another modern innovation that's included in these rituals can be a talit or a kiddush cup or another ritual object that is given, excuse me, given to a child on the day of their Brit, whatever ceremony it is to bring them into the covenant of the Jewish people, and or it can be some other ritual object that's not listed here, and then that becomes their first piece of Judaica that they can fulfill mitzvahs with throughout their lifetime. I still have, if I thought ahead, I would have gone into the kitchen and grabbed it. If you stick around, if you remind me, I'd be happy to go and grab it and show you. But I still have the Kiddush cup from my Brit Mila that was given to me at that point. And it's something that I still have among my Judaica. A beautiful custom that in fact, I never even heard about until after I became a rabbi in the community that I served, is to buy a talit or to gift a talit to a baby, a boy or a girl, at the Brit Milah, and then that talit can be what they are wearing when they become a bar or bat mitzvah. Which brings a connection between these different life cycles. It can be either something brand new that you're saying, this we're buying on behalf of you, whether it's a parent or grandparent or aunt, uncle, whatever, presenting it to the infant child, or it can be something that has a special family history that's incorporated into the service, where I know a lot of couples will say, use the Kiddush cup that they used for their wedding and include that into the ceremony. So there are a lot of ways to incorporate Jewish elements into the ceremony and to make that the foundation of the child's Jewish life to come, always with an eye on the future. What I do for girls is basically Mila minus the Mila, right? Circumcision minus the circumcision. The ceremony that I do is identical for boys or girls. The blessings are fundamentally the same, just minus the actual act of Mila. Because as I view it, men and women are completely equal in every ritual way in Judaism that I practice. And so the ceremony of welcoming a girl, all the more so, is a sign that it is the same type of welcoming into the same type of covenant, whether it's a boy or a girl. But the way that we mark that physically, of course, is different. You'll also see, for example, especially in Orthodox communities, a Jewish girl is welcomed into the Jewish people, if not the covenant of the Jewish people, with an aliyah l'Torah, being called up to the bima with the parents, and receives her name as she's called up to the Torah and announced in a special blessing during the aliyah, a special type of mishaberach. You see this very commonly in around 30 days in Orthodox Jewish communities. The ceremony can, regardless of what type of ceremony it is, for a girl, it's very common to see inclusion of blessings or readings from Ruth, Hannah's prayer, Proverbs, the Sheva Brachot, and so on. Again, ways to connect with our ancient history. The ceremony itself. For a boy, it's on the 8th day, even if it's Shabbat. Now, this is one of the really interesting things in the Talmud. We find this discussion in Tractate Shabbat of what if this 8th day, what if this time for the, what if this time for Mila is happening exactly exactly on Shabbat? Do you wait until after Shabbat? Do you do it early on the 7th day? And the answer is no. This is something that is so important that even though there are a couple of different parts of the ceremony that violate uh, the traditional observance of Shabbat, the types of work that are traditionally prohibited on Shabbat, such as carrying, such as cutting, such as writing, if you're including adding a person's name, if there's a certificate of some kind. All of these activities that normally would be forbidden to do on Shabbat. They're types of forbidden work, right? You remember we talked about, when we talked about Shabbat, there are 39 categories of work. Even these are permitted in order to fulfill Brit Mila on the 8th day. That's how important it is that the ceremony still takes place, even taking precedence over our observance of Shabbat. It can take place in a person's home or in the temple sanctuary. Of course, this is talking about normal times. You know, these days, uh, I know it's the wrong religion, but I saw, you know, recently, maybe a couple months ago, you know, priests are now doing baptism with a squirt gun. I don't think we can. And then there were the jokes about, you know, Moyle doing a Mila with like a pruning hook, you know, long pole, and then, you know, trying to. That's a joke. The water guns were real. That's a, you know, some very, you know, progressive priests were saying, you know, hey, holy water is holy water. You know, we could do it with a squirt gun from across the room. We do not. If you've seen those pictures, it's very funny, but that's not not a real thing. In normal times, this is a ceremony that can take place in um, a home or in the sanctuary, usually the parent's home, but it could also be the grandparents' home. Um, in particular, if the custom of the community is to have a really big party, a big luncheon, it's a lot of stress when you've just had a baby and now you need to host, you know, the entire city in your home. So very often it will be done in somebody like, you know, a grandparent's home, or even another, you know, um, a clubhouse space or something like that, where you can host the ceremony um, and still be able to retreat afterwards to your personal private spaces, right? Or it can be in the sanctuary of the synagogue, marking you know, that special relationship. Let's talk a little bit about the roles of different people in the ceremony. Now, these are, some of these are you know, fundamental to the ceremony, and some of them are more or less optional. I'll talk about what that means in a moment. So first, you need a moil. You notice rabbi is not first on the list. You don't really need a rabbi for the Brit Milah ceremony. Although it probably makes it a lot easier. You have somebody to coordinate it, you have somebody to lead the blessings to make sure everything runs smoothly. But in terms of the ritual itself, uh, you know, a rabbi is just an educated Jew. Most of the things that I do are not exclusive to me. Any member of the congregation can lead a service. Any member of the congregation can say blessings. Any member of the congregation can teach. All of the things that uh, other than conversion, you do need a rabbi for conversion, other than for, although maybe there's a possible exception to that as well. Um, in modern day Judaism, there's no exception, but in pre-modern times, you go back 500 years and you see communities where there wasn't a rabbi and we're still able to do conversion with a Beit Din. But with three educated members of the community, members in good standing, so to speak. Not really. You don't need a rabbi to bless your home. You don't need a rabbi to perform Brit Mila. You don't need a rabbi to pray an Amidah service. You don't even need a rabbi to pray a Kol Nidre service. All of those can, and in this community, have been done without a rabbi. Although having a rabbi makes most of those things a lot easier. But you do need a moel. You do need somebody who can perform the actual milah. In fact, mohel and milah come from the same root. You can probably hear the similarity there. The moel is the person who actually performs the milah, performs the circumcision. You've got kvater or kvatrin, which is we sort of loosely translate that as godparents. It's a Yiddish word. It actually is connected with the word godparents, but this is the special role of the person who is the very first to welcome the new child into the covenant. So they get the privilege of saying welcome first, Bruchim Habayim, or Baruch Haba, or Baruch Haba'ah, to the child first before anyone else. Very often this will be grandparents, it might be an aunt or uncle, it can be one person, it can be two people, and sometimes it will be a couple that is close friends with the parents. There are a lot of different people who can fill that role, depending on what the parents would prefer. The second role is the sandak or sandeket, which would be a woman. In ancient times, the sandak was the person who would physically hold the child during the circumcision. So you can imagine this is a role that requires an awful lot of trust, right? If you're going to put your baby into the hands of somebody who's going to physically hold them while the circumcision is being done, you want to make sure that you really are somebody that you can trust absolutely and honor completely, and somebody with steady hands, somebody who's not going to get squeamish. Somebody who you really have respect for. I've actually seen this in one ceremony that I did with another rabbi with a mohel who was an Orthodox mohel who had been college friends with the father, and so we did the service together. And in that particular case, the sandak actually did physically hold the baby boy during the milah, during the circumcision. In most cases, in modern day practice, that's not the person who physically holds the child, but they symbolically hold the child during the ceremony. And it's believed in ancient times at least, and I would say in modern times as well, that the positive attributes of the sandak or sandeket are passed on through this ceremony to the baby boy or the baby girl in the case of a Brit Bat. So you want to choose somebody based on their characteristics. You also have Elijah. Elijah shows up just like for Passover. Elijah shows up to every Passover Seder, right? To drink Elijah's cup. There's actually a whole nother story about that. Maybe we'll do a class on it when we're a little bit closer to Passover, why we have a fifth cup, why we have Kos Eliyahu. But we also have Kiseh Eliyahu, not just the cup of Elijah, but the chair of Elijah. At every ceremony, you have a special chair set aside for Elijah, who is present in every Brit Milah, Brit Bat, with the hopes that within the lifetime of this child, that Elijah will come to announce the coming of an age that we refer to as the Messianic age, the age when there will be no more war, pain, hunger, disease, when there will be peace and brotherhood among all people across the world. That's a time that we hope and pray for will happen within the lifetime of each child, and that each child who is born in the Jewish community will help to bring such a time closer. So that's a special blessing to include a place for Elijah for every baby boy or baby girl that's born. The order of the service itself, the kavatar or kavatrin, as I mentioned, will bring in the baby, traditionally from the arms of the mother into the ceremony. There is a custom, and I wish more people did it. I think it's a nice custom. I wish more people did it, but there's an ancient custom that the mother of the child of a baby boy is not present at the Mila, is not present at the circumcision. It's, in my experience, very stressful for um, a new mother. You've got hormones running through your body. You're exhausted from giving birth 8 days earlier. And to be able to, keep track of all the people in the room, all the people in your life who are there to celebrate with you, and to be a part of this ceremony that is physically changing your baby boy is very stressful. And I wish more people would. I always make the offer. So far, I've never had someone take me up. I've never had a mother take me up on the offer to stay in another room or another building completely during the Mila. But I think it's very nice. And that is still done in a lot of communities. You don't see it very much in Reform or conservative communities. Uh, but I think that there's some ancient wisdom to that. Um, of course, in a modern day ceremony, you might not have, in a modern day ceremony, you might not have the, parents, or specifically the mother, um, in a separate room. She would be there as part of the ceremony. After that, after the kavator or kavatrim bring in the baby from his or her mother's arms into wherever the ceremony is, they welcome that child. Elijah's chair is designated. The sandak holds the child. The rabbi, moil, or parent will say the blessing over Mila. The Mila, or circumcision, takes place, which, just so you know, a Mila, depending on how it's performed, there are a couple of different methods, which can take either a few seconds or a couple of minutes, depending on which method is used. I don't have a particular preference or recommendation. I think there are benefits and drawbacks to each, but I can help you with the research if such a time comes that you're looking into it. Usually it heals completely in about a week. I tell parents, and they don't believe me until they see it for themselves, that most babies cry more during the setup for the Mila than the actual Mila itself. It's uncomfortable. Babies don't like to be uncomfortable, but the physical pain of the circumcision is not what is making the baby cry in most cases, and I've been to many, many Brit Mila ceremonies. That's followed by a parent's blessing and the naming, where the child receives his or her Hebrew name. Finally, like all Jewish celebrations, that's followed up by a Kiddush. Let's talk about, in modern times, we're beginning to see more and more people object to Mila. Why is that? It's seen sometimes as an unnecessary surgery. It's an unnecessary procedure. Why would you be doing something that has no physical need that really is a surgical procedure by definition. People are afraid that improper circumcision can cause complications, and this is true. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. It's believed to reduce sensitivity or have lifelong effects on men when the baby becomes men. Now, as for the last one, I know a lot of Jewish men and a lot of non-Jewish men who've been circumcised and a lot of men who have not been circumcised. And between the two groups, I don't know of anybody who complains that their life has been made detrimental, that their love life has been made detrimental in their marriage as a result of circumcision. Everything seems to continue working fine. Let me talk about some of the health benefits. We know from medical research, and I of course encourage you to do your own research with an asterisk, with a caveat I'll talk about in a moment. These, if you look at the American Medical Association, if you look at the British equivalent where there's a lot of research, if you look at I'm forgetting the name of the Pediatric Association of America. I forget that I don't remember if that's the name or something close to that. You can find lots and lots of research has been done relating to circumcision as a medical procedure. And some of the things that they find that actually provide medical benefits are that it can reduce chance of infections or UTIs. It reduces the spread of HIV and other STIs, sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections. We know that it reduces the spread of HPV, which means it's not only protecting your son, but it's protecting the daughters of people in the future, because we know that HPV is a major cause of cancer in women, which can be spread. It's a virus which can be spread, and it has all of these negative effects. It can reduce the risks of certain types of rare cancer, mostly related to HPV, but not exclusively. There are other types of penile cancer that seem to be reduced as a result of circumcision. It can prevent rare disorders or deformities that prevent the function of the organ that can occur in a very small percentage of people. You might notice that I listed here certain types of rare cancer and rare disorders or deformities. These are rare cases in terms of the overall benefits, even though in these particular situations it may be a significant medical benefit to be circumcised. These situations are not the norm, they're the exception. So let me talk about intactivists. When you search online, I said there's going to be an asterisk. Any type of research that you do online, you're going to run into these people. There are people who do not have medical objections to Brit Mila. We know that there can be dangers associated with circumcision, and there are medical benefits associated with circumcision. But really the benefits and the possible drawbacks are both, in very rare instances, so really the medical recommendations varies by different medical organizations. Some say that on the whole it's beneficial to be circumcised. Some medical organizations say on the whole there's not enough benefit to recommend circumcision of all boys. There are no medical organizations that I am aware of that specifically say circumcision is harmful. That's important to note, because when you do any kind of online research, you're going to run into sources and you're going to run into individuals who call themselves intactivists, meaning intact. Here's a picture of one protesting. I've seen these people in person. I encounter them much more online. And This slide, this information was not part of this class in previous years that I've taught about it, but they've become so prevalent that I think it's important that you have this information. This is a group of virulent and aggressive social media activists. They use shock and attack style persuasion to get their point across. They are anti-circumcision. You can see an example of these shock tactics in the photo here. They operate like other anti-science movements. You heard me mention that there is no medical organization in the world that I am aware of that specifically says circumcision is harmful, don't do it. And yet, despite the science being pretty clear and pretty well studied, they operate like other anti-science movements. They say we have to ignore the science. We're going to appeal to other areas of your decision-making process, you know, using shock or attack, and trying to have a conversation with these folks. If you, when I say they're virulent and aggressive, you can post on just about any social media site something about circumcision, and you'll find that these people just seem to show up. They come out of the woodwork and they'll be there and they'll say circumcision is wrong, it's immoral, you're killing babies, you're a sexual pervert if you are in favor of circumcision. I mean, every type of things that I won't even repeat. That's the tip of the iceberg that I'm giving you. You'll get much more extreme reactions than that. Trying to have a discussion with them is sort of like if you've ever tried to have a discussion with anti-vaxxers or flat earth movement folks, that you just can't have a rational argument with people who are fundamentally irrational. So when you encounter them, the best thing to do is ignore them. You might let other people who are in the conversation know if you are having a discussion online, or if you're looking at articles online and you come across this, you might let other people know, by the way, this is this group, this is what they do. Trying to argue with them or reason with them is, I find, a pretty futile effort. They are somewhat effective and very interested in identifying as a progressive cause, that they are about rights, they're about protecting babies, that they're about modern ideas. They like to attach themselves to LGBT marches. And in fact, they have the loudest voice in some of the most progressive countries in Europe, where their goal is to completely ban, completely eliminate circumcision as a practice. Are they anti-Semitic? You see, I put it here with a question mark. My experience, when you're talking about any online behavior or in-person behavior, if you have to ask whether or not it's anti-Semitic, that's kind of an answer in itself. Are they specifically motivated by anti-Semitism? Is that at the core of what they're about? That's an impossible question to answer. They don't specifically preach Jews are evil, but they do say anybody who circumcises babies must be evil. Well, who is that? That's Jews and Muslims. So, I mean, you've got, clearly there's some unaddressed bigotry here. There are people who are deeply psychologically damaged, who are vulnerable and who are swept into this movement, or this supposed movement. And you have people who are, I believe, genuine dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semites who view this as a favorable way to legislate against Jews. It's an easy point of attack because it's such a common Jewish practice, and because it is something that on the surface can be easily depicted as a barbaric practice. We know that it's not. We know that it's totally safe. As I said, it's been studied. Scientists know this for a fact, because it has been studied tremendously across decades in great detail. If there were scientific medical reasons why Mila is not safe, we would know about it by now because we have studied it. So here's the bottom line. The health evidence, the medical evidence, is not a compelling reason to get Brit Mila, to circumcise your child. We see this increasingly among younger Jews who say, you know, we want to raise our children as Jewish, but we don't want to circumcise our children. It's a growing sentiment because of this anti-circumcision movement. The people who are furthest out in front who are the most aggressive are easy to see that they're despicable, but there are shades of gray in between. Ultimately, as I said, the health evidence is not compelling. There are some medical organizations that say, on the whole, it's beneficial. There are some medical organizations that say, based on the research, on the whole, there's no reason because there are benefits, but there are also drawbacks. And those benefits and drawbacks are rare. So if you don't make a decision based on the health benefits, let's talk about the spiritual health of your child. There are lots of things that we do for our children that may be harmful to them at the time. We make our kids eat their vegetables. We make our kids go to school when they don't want to. We make our kids get their shots when they don't want to. There are lots of parts of being a parent that are unpleasant, but you do it because of their emotional development or their physical development, so that they can grow up and be healthy and happy and educated. This is something that you can do for your children for their spiritual health, for their spiritual development. Yes, it's unpleasant. It's not fun for them. It's not fun for you as parents. Nobody likes to see their children in any sort of suffering. But when you weigh that against the fact that this is the oldest Jewish tradition, who was the first Jew? Abraham. Even before Sarah, Abraham was the first Jew. And how did he signify his special relationship with God? It was through Mila. This is the ritual which began the Jewish people. It's also possible that this is a case of wisdom of the ancients. You know, our ancestors did not know when they came up with the rules of kashrut, of eating kosher food, that pork could give you trichinosis, that eating shellfish could give you salmonella, that mixing different types of foods on the same service could lead to cross-contamination. They didn't know any of those things. But we find that kashrut, keeping kosher, has numerous health benefits. There's a wisdom of our ancestors that understood certain things about the world intuitively that is lost to us. We just don't have that kind of intuitive understanding of our world. We have a lot of other tools that help us understand different aspects of our world in sometimes more depth than our ancestors could have ever imagined. But this might be something that the explanation is beyond us because we haven't discovered the explanation yet. It wasn't until, you know, Louis Pasteur invented or discovered germs within the past couple hundred years that we understood why it was a good idea not to eat, you know, raw oysters. But our ancestors knew that that's something that they shouldn't do. Ultimately, it's a matter of Jewish citizenship, that being a member of the Jewish people is connected with this particular ritual, and it has been since the beginning of Judaism. It is still, even among secular Jews, Jews who are not active practitioners of any other religious rituals, or very few religious rituals, it's still the most commonly practiced Jewish ritual across the board, across history, across time, across space. You go to totally secular area of Israel, and you'll still see every single Jewish boy, even if they've never set foot in a synagogue, is circumcised, because it's just a matter of belonging to the Jewish people. And finally, it's a matter of being dedicated to God's service. It's a matter of making something holy, making something distinct, of saying our child is part of the Jewish people's sacred mission, that we are dedicated to God. And that requires some sacrifices on our part. It requires us to do some things that might be difficult. All of these are reasons why if you ever encounter somebody who's uncertain whether or not they should circumcise their child, these are all part of the conversation that you can have to help them understand why it is so important to the Jewish people. Moving on to other birth rituals, Pidyon Haben literally means the redemption of the firstborn son. It is part of an ancient promise to dedicate the firstborn son to temple service. Before there were Kohanim, before there was a class of priests, the firstborn son of each family would be dedicated to the temple. When the Kohanim were given in place of the firstborn son of each family, that was a ceremony that was developed. Today it's a relatively rare practice, particularly in Reform and conservative congregations. Although it's also one of those traditional practices that's gradually gaining a comeback and becoming more popular. It's done the 30th day after birth. It's based on this verse from Exodus. You can look it up if you would like. And it's a reminder that God has spared our people from death, slavery, destruction, and renewed a new generation with the birth of this child. What do? You take 5 shekels. It's given symbolically to a Kohen. You can work out the exchange rate on your own. I don't know, maybe Google has the dollar to shekel exchange rates. We'll talk about that. If you have a child in the future and you'd like to do Pidyon Haben, then come and talk to me and we can work out the details of how the ceremony is done. It's given symbolically to a Kohen of the community, and then that money is donated to either the synagogue or to another charity. Jewish naming, or specifically Hebrew naming. Why do you need a Hebrew name? What are different naming traditions, and how do you choose a name? This is going to be an important one, and this is what we're going to talk about after the class. Among those of you who are going through the conversion process, you might be interested, how do I choose a Hebrew name? All right, first of all, why do you need a Hebrew name? What does it do for you? The ancients believed that there was power in a name. Just by naming something, we achieve a certain connection and a certain mastery over it. In fact, we see this in modern day psychology, that just being able to name a feeling or name an experience gives us the ability to emotionally handle it or deal with it. Of course, in the ancient times, they believed that having this ability to name something was a fundamental way of gaining mastery over the world around us. That names speak to the fundamental nature of things. If you attended my recent class, I don't remember which Monday it was, you can find it on our YouTube channel, all about Hebrew names. You can see some of the details of how this played out in traditional Jewish text. It is believed that your Hebrew name is the name of your soul. What does your name refer to? You know, if I say a box, you know that it's referring to the physical attributes of a box. If I say, you know, table, it's referring to the physical attributes of the table. And yet, if I say table, that can mean any table. What if I want a specific table? Well, that table doesn't have a specific word for it because it doesn't have a name. If I say a person, well, that can be any person, but one person is not indistinguishable from another. Each person is unique and has a unique relationship with God. That's your soul. And the name of that soul, of your unique personhood, that's your Hebrew name. It is the name which is used in Jewish rituals throughout a person's lifetime, from being called by an aliyah to the Torah, or your first aliyah to the Torah, which is your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. It's used in Hebrew prayers, whether it's a prayer for healing or a prayer for blessing, whatever the case might be. Your Hebrew name is used in those prayers. Your Hebrew name is used on your ketubah if you get married. You have the bride and the groom sign their names in Hebrew on the ketubah. It is also part of your legacy to future generations who might be named after you in the Jewish community. Let's take a look at naming traditions. Across the Jewish world, there are lots of different naming traditions. In the Ashkenazi world, it's accustomed to name after a deceased relative, and it's also customary to have a Hebrew and a Yiddish name. For example, you might have heard of Dov Ber. That's a very common Ashkenazi Jewish name. Dov is the Hebrew word for bear, like big scary animal, the bear, right? So Dov Ber would be the Hebrew and Yiddish words for their synonyms, so they go together. So it's very common to have a Yiddish and a Hebrew name together. In Sephardic communities, it's common to name after a living relative rather than a deceased relative. By the way, in Ashkenazi communities, there's an interesting superstition around names and why you don't name after somebody who's still living, because what if the angel of death comes looking for a particular soul? We know that the name is your Hebrew name is the name of a person's soul. What if the angel of death comes looking for a particular person's soul and says, "Oh, I'm looking for Shmuley," and gets the wrong Shmuley? So just to be safe, you don't name a child after somebody who's still alive in Ashkenazi custom. Although in Sephardic custom, you do name after somebody who's alive, because if you're going to honor somebody, they might as well be around to see it, right? It's kind of nice. There's an Israeli custom of naming after modern nature objects, of animals or plants or things that exist in nature. It's part of this modernizing idea of bringing sort of the Israeli culture is beyond just ancient Jewish culture. It's not, encased in amber and preserved from thousands of years ago, that it's something very modern, very contemporary, very connected with the here and now. And so a lot of nature names are used very commonly in Israel. Or there are other naming customs. It could be based on an English name or a virtue or a blessing. It's also, there's a custom of changing a person's name at various times in one's life. In particular, when one goes through an extreme difficulty with health, when somebody is very sick, perhaps deathly ill. And again, that's connected to this idea of the angel of death has a name that they're looking for. That's the soul they're going to take. And if you change your name, then it will sort of confuse or confound the angel of death, and you won't be able, you'll live beyond your years. So how do you choose a name? Well, there are a few different ways to do it. You can choose a name based on an English name or an initial. This is if you're naming a child, or if you're choosing a name for yourself or your family as you're going through conversion. So for example, if your name is Adam, guess what? That's already a Hebrew name. Adam is a Hebrew name. So you just use your English name. My name is, well, I'll talk about my name in a minute. My middle name is George. I was named after one of my grandparents. And so my Hebrew middle name is Gedalia, which shares that letter G. So that was, it's not the same name because George is not a Hebrew name. There's no Hebrew equivalent of George, but you can use that initial and create a name based on that initial. They both have that G in common. Or it can be based on the meaning of an English name. So for example, if your English name is Grace, well, guess what? There's a Hebrew equivalent that means grace, and that's Hannah. You can spell Hannah with or without the C. There are different ways to spell it. A lot of, how do you spell Hanukkah? Nobody knows. There are a lot of different ways. It could be named after a relative. So for example, my Hebrew name is Nisan, Nisan Gedalia, right? Nisan was the name of my father's father's father, my great-grandfather, who was a baker. They said his hands were so calloused from hard work that he could reach into a hot oven and pull out a tray without any gloves. And so I was named after Nisan, who was a baker. That was my great-grandfather, so that's how I got the name Nathan. It actually came from my Hebrew name, which is Nisan. It could be, you could choose based on a character traits. So for example, if somebody is heroic, or if your blessing is that you hope your child will be heroic, Gavriel means heroic. That could be a name for a boy or a girl, Gavriel, Gavriela. Or, like the Israelis do, you can choose nature names. So for example, a wave, like an ocean wave, is Gal. Anybody watch the new Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot? That's her name means wave. It's a Hebrew in the Israeli custom, a nature name, describing something in nature. And that can be an animal. There's Arya, which is a lion. It could be, again, Dove, which is a bear. It can be, um, a bird. Tzipora means bird. It could be a tree. Ilan or ilanit is a type of plant. So there are lots of different, vered is a rose. There are lots of different names that you can choose from that represent something in nature. So if you've got, something that is really meaningful in nature, there may be a Hebrew name that's connected with it. That's it for Hebrew names and birth rituals. Stick around if you have any questions. Stick around for some discussion. And if you are taking the class for the purposes of conversion, do stick around so that we can cover some new things as our first class in the new year. Happy New Year. Happy 2021. We made it through. We're here. And it's great to be here with all of you. I'm glad we all made it. So stick around. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.